On February 20th, 2026, a team of Chinese researchers published a paper in Nature, one of the most rigorously peer-reviewed scientific journals in the world, describing something telecommunications engineers had been struggling with for years: a working system that seamlessly merges fiber optic and wireless communication into a single unified network, setting new records for data transmission speed in the process. The team, led by researchers at Peking University in collaboration with Pengcheng Laboratory, Shanghai Tech University, and the National Optoelectronics Innovation Center, had solved what engineers call the bandwidth gap, the fundamental mismatch between how information travels through glass fiber optic cables and how it travels through the air as a wireless signal, a gap that has long forced telecommunications networks to awkwardly convert data back and forth between these two very different physical systems, introducing delays and inefficiencies at every conversion point. This is the real verified story behind the headlines claiming China has achieved a shocking 6G breakthrough. And understanding it properly means understanding both genuinely impressive science and a healthy dose of realistic context about just how far away 6G, as an everyday consumer technology, actually still is. Let's start with the actual technical achievement, because it's a genuinely clever piece of engineering, even if it doesn't quite live up to the instant world changing. Framing, some headlines have given it. Modern telecommunications networks rely on two fundamentally different physical media to move data around. Fiber optic cables carry information as pulses of light, traveling through incredibly thin strands of glass, offering enormous bandwidth and very low signal loss over long distances, which is why fiber forms the backbone of the internet, carrying data between cities, countries, and continents. Wireless networks, the kind your phone connects to, carry information as radio waves traveling through the air, offering the crucial advantage of not requiring a physical cable to reach every single device, but facing real limitations in bandwidth, range, and susceptibility to interference that fiber doesn't have to deal with in nearly the same way. For decades, connecting these two systems has required converting data from light pulses into radio waves and back again at various points in the network, a process that works, but introduces inefficiencies and becomes an increasingly serious bottleneck as networks are asked to carry more data, faster, with lower delay, exactly the kind of demands that both the current AI data center boom and the eventual rollout of 6G wireless technology are placing on telecommunications infrastructure simultaneously. The Chinese research team's breakthrough is developing what they call a fiber wireless integrated converged communication system, a way of unifying these two different signal types far more seamlessly than previous approaches allowed, reducing the inefficiency of that constant back and forth conversion and setting new records for how fast data can move through a combined fiber and wireless network as a result. According to the researchers, the system shows particularly strong potential for two specific applications that are becoming increasingly important as the technology industry evolves: 6G base stations, the physical infrastructure that would eventually support next-generation wireless networks, and wireless data centers, an increasingly important category of infrastructure, given how explosively demand for AI computing power has grown over the past few years, requiring ever faster, ever more efficient ways to move enormous quantities of data between servers, storage systems, and the wider internet. Wang, one of the researchers involved, described the work as laying a solid research foundation for the next generation of ultra-broadband, high-speed integrated networks, notably measured technical language, the kind actual scientists use when describing genuine progress, rather than the "this changes everything overnight" framing that tends to dominate more sensationalized coverage of the same underlying result. It's important to place this specific paper inside the much broader context of China's overall 6G research program, because this single Nature publication, however genuinely impressive, represents one piece of a much larger, multi-year, highly coordinated national effort, not an isolated bolt from the blue discovery. China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology reported that the country completed the first phase of its 6G technology trials after 4 consecutive years of organized research, a milestone reached around November of 2025, yielding what officials described as more than 300 distinct advances across various key technological areas relevant to 6G. This first phase specifically focused on establishing the main technical directions the eventual 6G standard would pursue, essentially mapping out which specific technologies and approaches show the most promise before moving into the next stage of actually integrating those pieces into working prototype systems. China's own government has been explicit and public about its 6G timeline, targeting completion of standards development activities beginning in 2026, pre-commercial trials in major Chinese cities by around 2028, and genuine large-scale commercial deployment sometime around 2030, with truly widespread rollout not expected until closer to 2035. That's a meaningfully different picture than the end of 5G happening anytime soon, and it's worth sitting with that discrepancy directly. because it's exactly the kind of gap between a dramatic headline and the sober, official timeline that deserves honest attention rather than being glossed over. There's also a genuinely significant regulatory milestone worth including here, because it shows real, tangible momentum behind China's 6G ambitions beyond just laboratory research. China became the first country in the world to grant frequency usage permits specifically for 6G technology trials. After its Ministry of Industry and Information Technology approved use of the 6 GHz frequency band for this purpose. That approval matters considerably more than it might sound at first, because it marks the formal shift of 6G research from purely laboratory-based simulations toward genuine real-world field testing, an important and necessary step for any wireless technology standard on its path toward eventual commercial deployment. According to the ministry, this specific frequency band was chosen partly because it's highly compatible with the existing infrastructure already built out for mid-band 5G networks, a deliberate practical engineering choice that should allow China to leverage its already mature 5G industrial base, keeping networking and construction costs lower and enabling what officials describe as a smoother, more gradual transition from 5G to 6G, rather than requiring an expensive, disruptive, from-scratch rebuild of the country's entire wireless infrastructure. That detail alone is worth pausing on, because it directly complicates the end of 5G framing in the headline in a specific, technically important way. If China's own regulators and engineers are deliberately designing 6G to be backward compatible with existing 5G infrastructure, specifically choosing frequency bands and technical approaches that let the country reuse its substantial existing 5G investment, rather than discarding it, that's a strong signal that the intended relationship between these two technologies is evolutionary and additive, not a sudden disruptive replacement. 5G networks represent an enormous, genuinely massive existing global infrastructure investment spanning millions of base stations, towers, and supporting equipment installed over the better part of the past decade. And no country, including China, is treating that investment as something to be abruptly discarded the moment 6G research produces its first laboratory breakthroughs. The far more realistic and far more boring picture is a gradual, multi-year overlay and eventual transition, similar to how 4G networks didn't instantly vanish the moment 5G was announced, but rather continued operating alongside 5G for years, and in many parts of the world continue operating today, even as 5G coverage has expanded dramatically.